Have you ever wondered what might be hidden behind one of the greatest figures of freedom the world has ever known? The imposing Statue of Liberty, erected to symbolize freedom, doesn't just hide its historical and cultural value, it conceals something much darker, something few know about. Imagine being in a dark, stormy New York night, with the wind piercing the air, and the city so silent you can almost hear your own footsteps echoing through the deserted streets. You're there, standing before the majestic statue, and something begins to happen. A strange sensation takes hold of you, as if watched by invisible eyes. The air seems denser, the night heavier. Then, suddenly, an old sailor approaches. His eyes are weary, as if carrying centuries of secrets, and his hoarse voice begins to tell you a story that challenges everything you know about the Statue of Liberty. He speaks of a dark guardian, condemned to eternal vigil over the statue, punished for a crime committed hundreds of years ago. "You don't know this story," he says, with a furtive glance, as if afraid of being overheard. "And you shouldn't know." But as much as the sailor's words seem like just another urban horror story, something in his gaze makes you doubt. After all, who could have imagined that a simple statue, erected with the promise of freedom, would hide such a mystery buried in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those who venture too close? What's going on there, near the base of the statue, with the wind howling and the shadows growing? Can you sense something strange in the air? Stay with me until the end. What you discover now may surprise you. Keep watching, because what comes next will make you look at the Statue of Liberty in a completely different way. As the sailor speaks, you feel like you're being pulled into a labyrinth of ancient mysteries. He describes the imprisonment of the Guardian, an entity that feeds on darkness and fear, condemned to live in a prison, made of shadows and steel, but somehow never able to escape. The Guardian seems to be everywhere, in every corner of the statue, in every stone that makes up its base. And as the story progresses, something in the air begins to shift. The wind, once calm, grows stronger. The statue, which once seemed distant, now seems closer to you than ever, as if it had leaned in to hear your words, as if it were alive. But before we continue our journey into this mystery, I need to know, what are you feeling so far? Have you ever experienced something like this, where the story and the place seem to come to life in a frightening way? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and it's always good to share these stories with those who truly understand the magnitude of what we're discussing. Oh, and if you're enjoying this mystery as much as I am, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. You'll want to know more about what's to come, and I'm sure this journey of mysteries and legends will continue to surprise you. So don't miss a thing. Subscribe and activate the bell to stay in the loop. Now, if you're ready to find out what really happened to the Guardian, let's move on to the darkest part of this story. As the sailor continues to tell his story, you begin to realize that his words are not mere echoes of the past. They carry weight, as if carrying the truth of centuries of silence, and something in his voice makes you believe he knows more than he's willing to say. The figure of the Guardian, condemned for an ancient crime, takes on a frightening dimension. This man, whose soul has been bound to the statue for eternity, is not merely serving a sentence, he is part of the very fabric of freedom. And most terrifyingly, he is not alone. The sailor pauses, observing the reactions around him, as if testing the group's endurance. He knows that what he is about to reveal could change the way everyone views the Statue of Liberty forever. His voice deepens, drawls, and he continues. "What many don't know," he says, "is that the Guardian was only the first. The crime he committed was no simple matter. He was responsible for a much greater secret, something he swore to protect at all costs. His prison was not merely physical. He was imprisoned in a layer of shadows, a prison that intertwined with the very ground where the statue stood. And what happens when a soul is condemned to guard such a profound secret? The answer lies around every corner, in every shadow that grows as night falls. Because over the centuries, the Guardian's presence has strengthened, becoming an immense energy, a cold and menacing force that looms over those who dare approach the statue. With each passing night, its presence grows stronger, and tourists, drawn by the grandeur of the sight, become easy prey for something much older and much more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The energy surrounding the Statue of Liberty is dense, as if every ray of light were a reflection of the Guardian. an invisible yet palpable manifestation that spreads through the air. As the sailor's story unfolds, you begin to feel something. It's not just the chill that presses against your skin or the wind that seems to increase in intensity. It's the feeling that something is watching, something that is there, waiting for you to uncover the hidden truth. The sailor looks at you, as if reading your thoughts. "You are no longer alone," he says softly. "The Guardian has seen you. You have entered his territory now. There is no turning back." His words hit you like a shock. For a moment you feel like you're being transported to a place beyond reality, where the lines between the physical and supernatural worlds blur. The statue, with its gigantic figure and expression of freedom, now seems like something much more sinister, as if it's watching, waiting for you to grasp the weight of history, the impact of a secret buried beneath layers of time and silence. Something inside you knows the Guardian never had the chance to live a normal life, to be an ordinary man. He's been transformed, the darkness in his soul now reflected in his eternal prison. The statue, built to represent freedom, actually hides the opposite, a force of oppression, of shadows that spread throughout. The sailor sighs, as if weary of carrying this burden, and says, "It's not just the Guardian who's trapped here. He guards something else, something left behind by those who condemned him. And when the wind howls and night falls, the Guardian breaks free. He goes forth to keep watch, to protect the secret, to ensure that no one discovers what lies behind the statue. What he guards is something far greater than any of us can comprehend." Now you begin to understand that the Guardian's story goes far beyond a simple punishment. He is part of a larger game, a game of hidden forces, of secrets that cannot be revealed. The energy he emanates is not just that of a vengeful spirit. It is the force of a forbidden revelation, a truth that, if discovered, could transform everything we know about American history, the Statue of Liberty, and even the laws of nature themselves. With each word, you're drawn deeper into this mystery, deeper into the plot of the Guardian, the statue, and the forces surrounding it. The atmosphere around you begins to shift, and you realize you're closer to understanding something much greater than you imagined. But there's still much to be revealed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, explore the behind the scenes of this ancient secret, and discover its impact on our reality. Meanwhile, a thought crosses his mind. Who will be the next to try to discover what is hidden there, beneath the Statue of Liberty? Who else will dare to face the dark Guardian who watches over freedom, or perhaps the prison disguised as freedom? Comment, "I'm ready to know more," and let's continue the journey. As the group of tourists approached the base of the Statue of Liberty, the night seemed quieter than usual. The biting wind whispered between the metal columns, and the city, usually vibrating with New York's energy, was unusually calm. The light from the lanterns illuminated the way, but as they gazed at the statue, a strange sensation settled in the air. It was as if the statue itself, imposing and eternal, was watching each of the tourists who approached, as if something inside it had been waiting for this moment. The group gathered around, trying to absorb the monument's grandeur, but it was when the wind began to howl more intensely that something unusual happened. They heard, in the distance, the sound of chains dragging on the ground, echoing through the shadows. At first, they thought it was the sound of the statue swaying, perhaps some old mechanism, or even the structure itself resonating. But soon the sound intensified, and they could clearly make out the sound of something moving among the stones, heavy metal chains dragging with supernatural force. The guide, his expression visibly pale, stopped speaking. He tried to hide his fear, but his eyes betrayed what he knew. "Calm down, it's just the wind," he said, trying to reassure the tourists, but his voice trailed off as if he didn't believe his own words. No one else spoke. The group was immersed in a tense silence. The wind seemed heavier now, and the sound of the currents grew louder, getting closer. Suddenly, the shadows around the statue began to form strangely. It wasn't a simple shift in the light or a trick of the wind. The shadows were shaped in an almost human-like fashion, as if something or someone were moving around it, invisible to the eye. It was as if the statue were being surrounded, watched, and with each movement, the figures in the shadows became clearer, but no one was visible. The shadows seemed to grow, as if stretching out from the base of the statue, dancing to the rhythm of the wind and the whispers of the surroundings. But there was no one there. The space was empty, but something was present. The guide, trying to remain calm, looked at the group and said again, "Don't worry, this happens all the time. It's just optical illusions, the light and wind creating shapes in the environment." But deep down, he knew what was happening. He knew the Yanjiu legends, the ancient stories that circulated about the statue and the Dark Guardian. He knew it was no simple illusion, and something in his gaze, something in his posture, made the tourists begin to realize that perhaps what they were seeing wasn't so easy to explain. The tension in the air grew with each passing second. Shadows continued to form, dancing around the statue, growing more intense. The sound of chains was louder now, closer, but no one could see where it was coming from. The guide, his hands trembling, stared at the statue, as if waiting for an answer, but nothing came. Silence fell for a moment, and then a chill ran down everyone's spine. It was as if an invisible presence were there, watching, waiting to reveal itself. It was at that moment that one of the tourists, a woman closest to the base of the statue, felt a huge chill run across her skin. She looked at the others, and before she could speak, something made her look at the statue. She felt a pressure on her shoulders, as if something were touching her, pushing her back. But when she turned, no one was there. She screamed in fright, and the others began moving toward her. The shadowy figure she had seen in the distance disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. But the feeling of being watched didn't diminish. In fact, it only intensified. The guide, still pale, closed his eyes for a moment. He knew this was the moment the Guardian would reveal itself. He knew that when shadows took shape around the statue, it was a sign that the entity was approaching, keeping a closer eye on those who dared to get too close. He felt the weight of history, the impact of the legend of the Guardian, a spirit condemned to watch over, protect, or punish all those who dared to invade its domain. He sighed, trying to remain calm, but deep down he knew that what was happening was not something that could be easily explained. There was no going back. Tension hung in the air, and the group of tourists were in a state of silent panic. They sensed, but couldn't see, what was approaching. They only felt the presence, the cold, the weight of those shadows that seemed to float around the statue. Something was about to happen, and no one could escape it. Understanding what these shadowy figures truly mean, what they represent, the Guardian, who seems to hide in the shadows, is not just a legend, but a constant presence, an energy that surrounds the Statue of Liberty in a way that goes far beyond mere story. What it guards, and what happens when someone gets too close to what lies hidden beneath the statue's base, remains unanswered to this day. The mystery is only just beginning to unfold. As the group walked away, trying to process what had just happened, a sense of oppression began to spread through the air, making the atmosphere even heavier. The statue, which had previously seemed merely a symbol of freedom and strength, now seemed alive, watching them with its fixed, empty, and unperturbed eyes. It was as if the statue itself was aware of every movement, every step the tourists took. An unusual omen took shape as the wind began to howl more intensely, cutting through the silence, bringing with it something no one could see, but everyone could feel. It was a chilling sensation that crept up everyone's spine, an invisible weight settling on their shoulders, making them feel increasingly vulnerable. There was no longer any doubt that something was there, with them, something that moved in the shadows but refused to reveal itself. The sound of the chains, which had previously seemed distant, was now closer, louder, as if echoing from deep within the statue itself, and it was impossible to ignore because the presence became real, tangible, like an invisible force that surrounded them but remained hidden. The guide, now visibly apprehensive, said something in a low voice. "Something's wrong. The Guardian never leaves. He's here." But his words seemed insufficient to explain what was happening. How could he, who knew the story by heart, feel so lost in the face of this? The group was growing tense, but no one dared speak. Everyone felt the presence. Everyone, without exception, was being watched, as if the statue's own eyes were watching them, waiting to reveal themselves. It was then that one of the tourists, trying to diffuse the tension with an act of bravery, took out her camera and pointed it at the statue, hoping to capture a photo that would demonstrate the grandeur of the place. But what she saw in the viewfinder was not what she expected. The photo didn't show the statue or the view of the harbor as she had imagined. Instead, a dark, distorted shadow appeared, seemingly taking shape behind the statue, in a place where no one was. The figure was grotesque, distorted, an invisible presence that seemed to have momentarily materialized but could not be logically explained. The sound of the chains grew even louder, now mixed with the sound of the wind, creating an ominous melody that cut through the night. The flashes of light in the sky seemed to intensify, as if the storm itself were being manipulated by an invisible force. It was as if the Guardian were drawing closer, stronger, closer, wanting to ensure that the secret hidden beneath the statue remained protected. It was impossible to deny. Something was there, a presence unseen but felt by all. A sense of dread gripped the group, and everyone began to back away slowly, their eyes fixed on the statue, as if expecting to see something manifest. But as they took steps back, the shadows around the statue began to move. Not naturally, like the movement of trees or the wind. The shadows stretched and twisted, as if they had a life of their own, following the group's every move. It was as if the Guardian himself were manipulating the light and shadows around him, keeping his presence hidden, but always there, watching. The guide, now paler than ever, muttered, something barely audible over the growing roar of the storm. He doesn't like to be seen. He doesn't like to be challenged. And with those words, the fear in the air intensified even further. The Guardian was no ordinary legend. He was an entity, a presence that fed on fear, curiosity, and the presence of the curious who ventured too close. He was no ordinary spirit, but something far more ancient and powerful, guarding secrets that, if revealed, could destroy the very essence of what freedom represents. The sound of the chains now mingled with the roar of the storm. The wind seemed to carry low voices, like whispers of lost souls, echoing in the tourists' ears. They looked at each other, trying to understand what was happening, but no one had an answer. Everyone felt the weight of it, but no one dared ask aloud what was happening, because deep down, everyone knew this was not normal. And yet, they were there, too close, close enough to be touched by that invisible presence that haunted them. Now, time seemed to have stopped. The statue, always majestic, was more somber than ever. Its eyes, invisible, seemed fixed on each of them. No longer a symbol of freedom, but a monster patiently waiting to devour anything that dared disturb its silence. But what no one knew was that, by approaching, by allowing themselves to be enveloped by this sense of oppression, they had become part of a much larger journey. They were playing a game much older than they could have imagined, and the Guardian, with its invisible presence, was only beginning to reveal itself. The Guardian, ever lurking, moves in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to manifest. And as he does so, his story continues to unfold, with more revelations and mysteries behind the solitary figure of the Statue of Liberty. Something much greater is at stake, something that goes beyond urban legends and that brings to light truths that should never have been hidden. The group, now completely terrified, didn't know what to do, but every movement seemed to be watched by invisible eyes. Fear, which had previously manifested itself as a vague, uneasy sensation, was now a concrete presence, hovering over them, surrounding them. Every sound, every shadow seemed to have a hidden meaning, and the tourists were paralyzed, trapped in an invisible web. The sailor, who had moved away a little, now approached again, his face even more serious and filled with the expression of someone carrying a long-kept secret. He looked at the group and, in a low voice, as if afraid to be overheard, said, "There's much more to the Guardian and his curse than you imagine. What you've felt, what you've heard, aren't just old stories or coincidences." He paused, taking a deep breath, and his eyes fixed on the tourists, searching for a connection. The Guardian never abandoned the statue, not because of his crime, but because he holds the key to something much darker, something that has been hidden for too long, and that, if revealed, could destroy everything we know about New York and the history we've been told. The sailor looked up at the Statue of Liberty, now illuminated only by the lightning that streaked across the dark sky. The statue, which had once represented freedom and grandeur, now seemed shrouded in mystery and darkness. "What the Guardian holds," the sailor continued, "is not just a secret about New York's past. He holds the key to a curse that was cast upon the city long before the statue was built. And that secret, if discovered, could change everything." The tension in the air grew, as if the wind itself were holding its breath, waiting for the truth to finally be revealed. The sailor began to speak about the origin of this curse, something very ancient, linked to the city's founders and the very birth of the Statue of Liberty. The statue was built not only to symbolize liberty, but to seal a pact. The Guardian, trapped in an eternity of vigil, was placed there to protect something that could destabilize all the power New York represents. A revelation that, if released, would bring consequences that not even the most powerful could control. The group, still speechless, looked around, as if trying to grasp the magnitude of it all. But the shadows and echoes of history seemed to intertwine with the night, as if the very foundations of the city were being questioned. What was this secret? What had truly been hidden for all these years? Each flash of lightning illuminated the statue, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if its stone eyes were truly alive, watching them, waiting for revelation. As the sailor continued to speak, the feeling that they were being watched grew even stronger. You may not see the Guardian now, but he is here. He is always here. History will never be forgotten, and the truth will always find a way to reveal itself. His deep, heavy tone seemed to resonate with the echoes of the wind, as if his words were being absorbed by the city and the statue itself, sealing yet another layer of mystery surrounding this place. However, as the group reflected on the sailor's words, the flashes of light in the sky grew even more intense. Each bolt seemed to strike the statue, as if signaling that the Guardian was there, watching, protecting, but also waiting for the right moment to reveal the secret. They could feel it, an immense, inexplicable energy enveloping them, as if they were part of a story far greater than the city could comprehend. Something was happening there, and the Guardian, though invisible, held the key to it all. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of chains and the lightning that illuminated the city. It was as if time itself were standing still, waiting to reveal the true face of history, the secret that had been kept there for so long. The fear, which had previously been merely a sensation, now became a palpable, all-encompassing presence that seemed to transcend the physical. It was something transcendental, a revelation of what lay hidden deep within the Statue of Liberty, something they were about to discover, but which would also change them forever. With this revelation, the sailor disappeared into the darkness of the night, leaving the group in a silence filled with unanswered questions. What did the Guardian guard, and how would it change history? They were about to find out. Something much bigger was at stake, and they were now part of that story. A story that, until now, could only be told in whispers, in the shadow of the statue. Have you ever imagined what would happen if the torch of one of the world's greatest symbols of freedom were relit and something much darker awakened with it? I was in New York, in the beating heart of the city, when a simple restoration project began to take a turn no one could have foreseen. The goal was simple: restore the Statue of Liberty's torch, rekindle the flame that had been extinguished for so long. It was just another expedition, or at least it seemed like one, until something happened. The torch, lit once more, began to glow brightly, but this light wasn't the warm, golden glow everyone had expected. No, what emerged was something far more terrifying: a red light, as if fueled by an unknown, malignant energy, as if something long forgotten had awakened from the darkness. The flame was no longer a simple fire, but something pulsing with an ominous tone, a glow that seemed to invite the worst to emerge from the shadows. Have you ever experienced something like this, where the simple light of something familiar becomes a threat? Something that once seemed harmless suddenly reveals itself as the key to something much deeper and more dangerous. What happened after this flame was rekindled was something I never imagined. A strange sensation filled the air, as if the city were about to be enveloped by something invisible, yet real, something the statue itself had been protecting for all these decades. The team there to restore the torch began to feel a pressure in the air, a growing oppression no one could explain. And then something even stranger happened. One of the technicians tasked with monitoring the flame began to have visions of ancient warriors whose souls seemed trapped within the statue itself. It was as if the torch was calling upon something much deeper than the team could comprehend, something much darker. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. What began as a simple restoration expedition turned into a journey to uncover secrets buried for centuries. Those warriors, whose souls were trapped, were not simply lost souls. They were guarding a secret, something that should have remained forgotten. And the torch, with its red light, was reviving everything. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this story, to understand what really lies behind this secret and what the flame was truly meant to protect. What happens when such an ancient secret begins to reveal itself? What is it telling us about the Statue of Liberty, about New York City, and about what has been kept there for so long? As the red flame intensified, a strange tension began to spread among the team members, a feeling no one could explain, but everyone could feel. The statue, which had previously seemed merely a monument, a symbol of freedom, now seemed to harbor something more, something dark and invisible that was beginning to awaken. The heat of the flame was different. It didn't radiate a welcoming light, as one would expect from a symbol of hope. It was a light that seemed to absorb the environment around it, distorting everything in its vicinity, creating a feeling of suffocation. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. It wasn't simply the heat. It was something more, something coming from within the statue itself. Those there to restore the torch began to feel uneasy, restless. The feeling of oppression intensified with each passing minute. But the real terror began when one of the technicians, the one closest to the flame, began having visions. At first, he tried to ignore them, thinking it was just stress or the heat of the flame affecting him, but it wasn't. He saw warriors, shadows of ancient men, their faces scarred by centuries of battle. Warriors from a distant era, condemned to live an eternity within the statue itself. They were lost souls, trapped in an invisible prison, waiting like sentinels to protect something that should have remained buried. These souls were no ordinary spirits. They were bound to the statue, imprisoned there to fulfill an oath, a mission unknown to anyone. They had been called to protect a secret hidden deep within the statue that, if released, would change everything. The technician's vision grew more intense. He began to hear voices, distant whispers, words that made no sense but were charged with immense power. With each step he took toward the torch, he felt himself drawn deeper into the center of the statue, as if pulled by an invisible force. He looked at the others and saw the same discomfort reflected on their faces. But no one knew what was happening. No one knew what the flame was truly awakening. When he looked back at the flame, he realized something had changed. The red light now pulsed as if alive, and what had previously seemed merely a strange glow became increasingly menacing. The flame wasn't just glowing, it was calling to something buried there, something waiting to be released. The air grew even denser, and the statue, imposing and silent, seemed to watch, as if aware of what was happening. Something ancient and unknown was revealing itself, and New York City, for all its grandeur, seemed insignificant before the power being unleashed. With each passing second, the technician's visions grew more vivid. He saw the warriors again, but now it was as if they were approaching, emerging from the shadows, manifesting themselves more clearly. They were no longer just present in the visions. They were there, in the flesh, or so it seemed. The shadows began to take shape, and he felt as if the statue itself were alive, breathing, pulsing with the same energy as the flame. The torch was not just a symbol of freedom. It was a key to a secret that had been hidden for centuries, something the entire city was about to discover, but which could be more destructive than anyone could imagine. The technician, now desperate, tried to pull away from the flame, but it was as if an invisible force prevented him from moving. The feeling of being watched by these entities, became unbearable. He tried to speak, scream, call for help, but the words wouldn't come. Fear gripped him completely. He knew, somewhere deep inside, that the flame wasn't just illuminating the New York night. It was opening a door to something much older and much more dangerous. And that door, now open, was beginning to reveal the secrets that had been kept hidden for so long. The technician was no longer alone. He knew it. The shadows, the warriors, were there, watching, waiting. Something was about to happen, and the entire city was about to be drawn into the center of this supernatural storm. He felt he had become part of something much larger, something that could not be stopped. The flame, now stronger than ever, was illuminating not only the statue but also a dark and dangerous path, a path that, once traveled, could never be undone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this mystery. What does this flame represent? What was it really calling out of the statue? And what happens when a long-kept secret is finally revealed? The answer may be more devastating than any of us could have imagined. Comment, that makes sense to me. The technician, now completely overcome with fear, seemed to be in a trance, his hands trembling as he sifted through old records and construction documents. He already knew something was wrong, but what he discovered next turned everything upside down. The Statue of Liberty, that global icon of freedom and hope, wasn't just a symbol of a new beginning for the nation. No, the statue, the one everyone saw as a sign of progress, was built on something much older, something that was far from a celebration of freedom. He found documents no one else had read. Among ancient maps and forgotten design notes, something caught his attention. The Statue of Liberty had not been erected simply as a gift from France. Beneath its base, a dark secret lay hidden, something no one had noticed. The statue was erected over a sacrificial site, an ancient altar to dark forces, a connection point between the world of the living and the afterlife. Sacrifices, made centuries before the monument's construction, had been performed there in the name of an invisible force that was now beginning to awaken with the flame. The discovery, as absurd as it seemed, could not be ignored. The flame, which everyone thought was merely a sign of renewal, was not merely rekindling the torch of freedom. It was unleashing something far more dangerous. The souls of those sacrificed warriors, whose lives were taken to fuel something much darker, were manifesting. Those men, known as protectors, were nothing more than victims, souls condemned to wander the darkness of a restless eternity. And now, with the flame shining brightly again, their souls were being freed, or rather, being drawn back, to haunt whoever dared invoke the power that had been buried there. The technician, as he tried to process what he was discovering, began to experience the same visions as before, but this time, they were more intense. He saw the warriors, no longer as vague shadows, but as clear, imposing figures, their armor stained with blood, their faces tormented by pain and fury. They were trying to communicate, trying to warn him of what was about to happen. But how could he understand? How could he grasp the magnitude of it all without believing it to be the product of his own failing mind? But it wasn't a delusion. The statue was alive somehow. It wasn't just keeping a secret. It was the focal point of a dark pact, a contract with forces beyond this world. As the flame continued to glow with that eerie red light, the technician began to realize that the city, the very place they were in, was not just a symbol of freedom. It was no longer the city he knew, with its bright lights and incessant energy. Now everything felt heavy, as if the earth itself were charged with a malignant energy, and he sensed that the statue was not just watching, but manipulating. He could feel, with every breath, the presence of these spirits, their tormented souls trying to break free from the prison built to keep them deep within the statue. What had seemed like just another restoration expedition had become an absolute nightmare. They weren't just rekindling a torch, they were rekindling a flame that shouldn't be touched. They were calling forth something that had been painstakingly buried, something that, if released, could destroy everything the city stood for. And most frightening of all, this force was no longer being contained. It was no longer a matter of public safety or the simple preservation of a monument. It was a battle against forces beyond human comprehension. And the moment the flame was rekindled, the city was scarred in ways none of us could have imagined. Now, the questions that began to arise in the minds of the coach and the team were terrifying. What was this dark force? What secrets were they about to reveal? And most importantly, could they stop the spread of this energy? Or was it already beyond control? The technician knew that as the flame continued to burn, more souls of the sacrificed warriors would be released, bringing with them a power that defied all logical explanation. But he wasn't ready for what would come next. The curse's impact had already begun to spread, and soon it wouldn't just be a matter of restoration. It would be a matter of survival. What exactly were these warriors guarding? What is the true secret of the restored statue and torch? What were the true costs of this curse? It's time to delve even deeper into the layers of this story and see where the buried secret will take us. Comment: I'm on this journey too. As the flame's red glow intensified, the air around it seemed to grow denser, as if charged with a malignant energy. The heat, which initially seemed, controlled, began to grow uncontrollably. It wasn't just the heat of a torch being rekindled, but something deeper, something that seemed to emanate from the very base of the statue, as if the structure itself were heating up from the inside out. The sense of unease that pervaded the room was palpable. It wasn't just the heat, but something that seeped into the minds and hearts of the workers. They began to hear whispers, quiet at first, but intensifying as the flame's glow grew stronger. These whispers came from within the statue, from a place no one could reach, from a part of the structure hidden, far from human sight. The workers tried to ignore them, thinking they were just occasional sounds caused by the metal structure or the wind passing between the columns. But as time passed, it became impossible to deny what was happening. The feeling of being watched by something invisible, began to grow. Each of them felt they were no longer alone there. The statue, in its immensity, seemed to have eyes, and those eyes were now fixed on them. As the whispers intensified, an unbearable pressure began to take hold. The heat, previously uncomfortable, became almost unbearable. It was as if the torch were alive, as if the fire itself were trying to consume everything around it. The workers began to sweat. Their clothes became soaked, and breathing became labored, as if the air were being squeezed from their lungs. They looked at each other, trying to understand what was happening, but no one had a logical explanation for what they were experiencing. They were beginning to realize that the Statue of Liberty wasn't just a symbol of freedom or a monument built with grand intentions. She wasn't just a gift to New York City. She was something much more complex, much more sinister. The statue was the prison of something much older and much more powerful than anyone could imagine. She was the connecting link between the living world and an evil presence that had been imprisoned for centuries. And now, with the torch rekindled, what had been sealed away was beginning to break free. The spirits of the sacrificed warriors began to manifest physically, no longer as mere visions, but as tangible forms. Shadows began to take shape before the workers' eyes. At first, the figures were vague, like silhouettes in the corners of their vision. But as the flame's brightness grew, they became clearer, more real. Ancient warriors, in worn armor, covered in dust, and dried blood began to appear around the statue, as if emerging from the metal walls themselves. Fear gripped everyone, but the real terror was only just beginning. These figures were not benign. They were not protectors. They were victims of a cruel fate, souls bound by an eternal oath, waiting for their chance to break free. What they were witnessing was no mere supernatural phenomenon. It was a curse that had been unleashed, a dark force that, for centuries, had been waiting for its moment to be released. And that moment had arrived. The flame was not simply a light of renewal. It was calling these souls out, to take their place in the world of the living once more, and New York City was not prepared for it. The technician, who had initially tried to rationalize what was happening, was now completely consumed by terror. He knew the visions weren't just projections of his mind. They were real. And with this realization, he began to question everything he knew about the statue, the city, and the torch's true purpose. It was no longer about restoring a symbol. It was about dealing with what had been released. And he knew that by trying to reignite that flame, they had inadvertently fueled something that shouldn't be released. The oppression in the atmosphere intensified as the warriors' spirits approached. The ghostly figures now surrounded the team, their presence a constant pressure on everyone's shoulders. The heat, now unbearable, seemed to consume everything around them. The workers began to move away from the torch, fearing what was manifesting before them, but they could not escape. The statue surrounded them, and the presence of whatever was there followed them, like a shadow that could not be ignored. The energy of the flame called to them, and even without meaning to, they were being pulled into the center of the curse. What exactly did these warriors represent? How was the curse of the eternal flame linked to New York's history, to the city's very founding? And why was the torch relit, allowing these spirits to begin to take form? Is there something else hidden beneath the Statue of Liberty? Something yet to be revealed? Let's explore the deeper layers of this story and understand the impact it had, and may still have, on the city. The air was heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Each breath felt like an effort, a constant struggle to remain calm as the group moved away from the torch. The heat of the red flame continued to increase, but now, more than ever, it seemed as if the torch had a life of its own. What had once been a simple restoration expedition, an attempt to reignite a symbol of freedom, had now become a fight for survival. Those warriors, whose souls had been trapped in the statue for centuries, were no longer mere apparitions. They were stronger, more enraged. The flame was no longer illuminating just the statue. It was fueling something much darker, something that should never have been awakened. With each passing moment, the warriors' spirits became more present. They weren't just fleeting visions now. They were there, flesh and blood, with their worn armor and empty eyes, seemingly moving in the darkness. The sound of chains dragging on the ground echoed louder and louder, as if the warriors themselves were trying to free themselves, to untie themselves from the chains that held them captive. The sound mingled with the wind, like ominous music, and paralyzed the group, as if fear were stronger than any attempt to rationalize what was happening. It was then that the expedition leader, his eyes filled with terror, made the only suggestion he could: extinguish the flame. They knew, somehow, that the flame was fueling something far beyond their control. But there was a problem. The torch, now bathed in an intense red light, seemed to resist their attempts to extinguish it. No one knew how, but the fire seemed to stay lit, as if impervious to any attempt at extinguishing it. The wind increased in speed and intensity, and no matter how hard they tried to control the flame, it continued to shine, defying their attempts to extinguish it. The warriors, whose souls were trapped in the statue, began to draw closer, more visible, more tangible. What had previously been a diffuse fear was now all around them, taking shape. Panic set in. They were being pursued by something they couldn't see but could feel. The energy emanating from the flame became almost palpable, as if it were interfering with reality itself. The shadows around the statue began to lengthen, stretching out from the base, as if trying to grab the expedition members, pulling them into a dark abyss, a trap from which there was no escape. They tried to run, but the shadows followed them, always one step ahead, blocking their escape routes, trapping them in an invisible prison. The feeling of being hunted was terrifying. Each member of the group knew they weren't dealing with a simple supernatural manifestation. They were dealing with an ancient power, far beyond anything any of them had imagined. The Statue of Liberty, in its grandeur, had become a portal to the unknown, a place where ancient sacrifices and curses still reigned, where damned spirits were being released, bringing with them a destructive force. What was happening there wasn't simple paranormal activity. It was a battle between the living and the dead, between the real world and a realm of terror that had remained hidden for centuries. And as the terror grew, the question lingered: who would emerge from this battle alive? Who would survive this confrontation with the unknown, with what had been awakened by the torch and the ancient sacrifices? What was this dark force that had been fueled and was now breaking free? No one there had any answers. They were simply trying to survive, trying to find a way out, trying to understand what could be done to stop it from consuming them. Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens when an icon of freedom, something that represents hope for so many, suffers irreparable damage? I was in New York, in the heart of the city, when a devastating fire struck the Statue of Liberty. A tragedy for the city, no doubt, but also something much deeper. The statue, which for so long was a symbol of freedom, light, and strength, was severely damaged. For all who saw in it the reflection of an ideal, that fire was a blow, a wound to the city's soul. But what no one knew, not even the workers tasked with restoring it, is that the fire hadn't just destroyed part of the statue's metal structure. It had awakened something hidden deep within it, something that, for centuries, had been waiting for the right moment to be released. When the repairs began, the expectation was that it would be just a simple restoration, a repair of the damaged parts. But no one could have imagined what was about to be uncovered. As workers began excavating the statue's inner layers, something strange began to happen. The Statue of Liberty, which has always represented light, freedom, and the promise of a new beginning, seemed to be harboring a much darker secret, one that should have remained buried. Something within the statue began to stir, as if awakened from a deep slumber, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the shadows. What seemed like a simple restoration task turned into a terrifying journey, a quest to unearth a forgotten past, yet somehow protected by the monument itself. What was hidden deep within the Statue of Liberty? And what did this fire have to do with the release of something far more ancient and terrible than anyone could have imagined? The restoration, which began with good intentions, soon became a race against time, as the true nature of what was hidden within the statue began to be revealed. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. The secret the Statue of Liberty was hiding isn't what you imagine. Something dark and terrifying has been unleashed, and this secret could change everything we know about the monument in New York City. Let's explore this mystery together and discover what truly lies beneath the feet of one of the world's greatest figures of liberty. Now I want to delve even deeper into this mystery. What was awakened by the fire, and what truly lies hidden deep within the Statue of Liberty? What would happen if this secret were revealed? The impact of such a dark story could affect not only New York, but the entire world. As workers continued repairs to the Statue of Liberty, the atmosphere around them grew tense, as if something was waiting to be discovered. What seemed like just another maintenance task was, in fact, about to turn into something much deeper and more disturbing. They began digging deep within the statue, searching for structural damage caused by the fire. But what they found there, between the layers of metal and stone, had no logical explanation. It was a secret chamber, a hidden space within the statue itself, something never before documented or even imagined. When one of the workers managed to open the chamber's entrance, a chill ran through everyone present. The sound that followed was indescribable, a scream of pain, anguish, and suffering that seemed to come from within the statue's walls. The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble with the intensity of the sound. It was as if the monument itself was experiencing the suffering of something that had been trapped there for centuries, waiting to be freed. The scream echoed through the inner chambers, reverberating even to the outside of the statue, growing louder and more unbearable. But what truly terrified everyone was what lay inside the chamber. Upon looking inside, the workers encountered a strange figure, almost human, yet somehow deformed, as if a distortion of what should have been a living being. Its body was covered in wounds, some open, others grotesquely scarred. But the most frightening, without a doubt, were its eyes, empty, lifeless eyes, yet carrying a sense of anguish and eternal pain. And then the impossible happened. Tears of blood began to flow from its eyes and wounds, falling to the floor with a viscous, disturbing sound. These tears were not ordinary. They didn't fall as simple drops. They seemed to have a life of their own, as if each drop carried within it the agony and suffering of that figure. And the sound of the tears hitting the ground, wasn't just the sound of falling blood. It was a deep sound, as if each tear were a curse, a manifestation of pain that could not be silenced. With each drop that fell, the feeling of terror grew. That figure wasn't a human being. It was something that had been imprisoned there for a reason far more terrible than anyone could imagine. The paralyzed workers tried to comprehend what they were seeing, but they couldn't. The air was heavy, and the shadows within the chamber seemed to move, as if the figure itself were trying to break free from its confinement. The creature's empty eyes, now fixed on the workers, seemed to be saying something, as if they were there to fulfill a mission or destiny beyond their control. But at that moment, no one knew what to do. There were no easy answers, only the fear that gripped everyone. The figure, with its bloody tears and muffled screams, was something that could not be ignored. That place, the secret chamber within the statue, was not just a historic discovery. It was a connection between the world of the living and something much darker, something that should have remained buried in the past, but now, with the torch rekindled and the evil awakened, was breaking free. And as they observed the terrifying scene, the workers began to understand that they were dealing with something that could not be explained, something that was beyond human comprehension. They had found much more than just a hidden part of the statue. They had found a secret that was buried there for a reason, and that reason was not good. But most distressing of all was what the tears of blood represented. What were these tears which seemed to have a life of their own, trying to reveal? And why now, after so many years, was the Statue of Liberty, with its flame of freedom, being used as a nexus for this curse? The answers lay hidden deep within the statue. But now, something much darker was beginning to unfold, and time was against them. Now I want to delve even deeper into this mystery. What else is hidden inside the Statue of Liberty? Who is this imprisoned figure, and why are her tears of blood so charged with power? What happens when a secret like this is revealed to the world? We're only just beginning to understand the impact of this discovery, and I believe what comes next will surprise you. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. The workers, their hearts racing and their hands trembling, tried to move quickly away. But something within the statue had already changed, something they could no longer ignore. The evil that had been trapped deep within the structure was no longer an invisible presence. It had been unleashed. What had seemed merely a deformed figure, a manifestation of suffering and pain, had transformed into something far more dangerous. This being was not a symbol of freedom as everyone had thought, but a malignant entity, an ancient force, imprisoned there for reasons that not even the most respected scholars could explain. The Statue of Liberty, erected to represent the greatness of the nation and the promise of freedom for all, actually held a much darker secret. She wasn't just a beacon of hope and triumph. She was, in fact, a prison. The being that lay there, imprisoned for centuries, wasn't a guardian, but an entity from another era, a malignant power that, over time, had been kept at bay, hidden beneath layers of history and, symbolism. And the rekindled flame, which everyone thought was a simple act of restoration, had done the unthinkable, unleashed that power. When the secret chamber was opened, the screams that emerged from within were not simply the sounds of a tortured creature's suffering. They were the echoes of something much older, deeper. The blood flowing from its eyes and wounds was not simply the sign of a being in agony, but the harbinger of the release of an ancient force, a force that had wreaked havoc in the past and was now, finally, being unleashed to wreak its terror once more. The statue, long seen as a beacon of freedom and hope, suddenly became a portal to evil. What seemed like a symbol of humanity's greatness had actually been built to house this malevolent entity, imprisoned there to protect the world from the power it represented. For generations, the city had looked to the Statue of Liberty and interpreted it as a beacon of welcome and freedom, unaware that it was, in fact, a prison. And now, with the flame rekindled and the secret chamber opened, the evil that had been imprisoned for so long began to spread, unleashing its influence upon the city. The pressure in the air increased as the workers tried to move away from the area, but it was as if the statue itself was drawing them in, as if it were alive, and wouldn't let them escape its grasp. The being within the statue, now becoming more real with each passing moment, wasn't a mere figure or a vision. It was there, somehow, physically present, even though no one could touch it. Its presence was immense, like a shadow that covered the city, spreading uncontrollable fear. What the workers were witnessing was not just a supernatural phenomenon. It was a battle between good and evil, something far greater than they could comprehend. And as they tried to escape, the city began to feel the effects of this force's release. Shadows lengthened, whispers took shape, and in the streets, the feeling of being watched grew. The evil that had been unleashed was no longer contained. It was spreading, fueled by the Statue of Liberty itself, now more a tool of chaos than a symbol of freedom. The figure imprisoned in the statue was no ordinary being, but a manifestation of everything that had been suppressed for centuries. And as this being took form, it began to summon the elements around it, manipulating the environment and creating a sense of oppression that was inescapable. The city, so vibrant and full of life, now seemed shrouded in an inexplicable darkness, as if a layer of evil had covered everything that had once seemed safe. What was once a place of hope was now being consumed by something much older, something that had always been there, patiently waiting to be released. As the workers and townspeople tried to understand what was happening, a terrifying truth began to unfold. The Statue of Liberty was not just a symbol. She was the prison of a primal force, a force that had been kept on the margins of history, and now, with its flame rekindled, she was preparing to unleash her power over everything and everyone. What had seemed like an accident, a simple restoration, had turned into an uncontrollable nightmare. What exactly does this entity represent? Why was it imprisoned in the Statue of Liberty? And what is the true story behind its presence there? We are only beginning to peel back the layers of this dark history, and each revelation brings us one step closer to what really happened. The city seemed to breathe differently after the secret chamber was opened. At first, no one understood what was happening, but as time passed, the consequences began to spread in a frightening way. The tears of blood that had flowed from the figure imprisoned within the statue were not limited to a simple manifestation of suffering. They began to spread throughout the city in an inexplicable way, seeping into the streets, the alleys, the busy avenues. Each drop of blood seemed to carry with it a malignant force, as if each one were a portal to evil, a pathway to something far more sinister. The blood did not dissolve into the earth, but seemed to mark the territory, spreading a growing oppression wherever it went. The sensation that gripped the city was indescribable. It was as if something invisible was dominating the environment, taking possession of every inch of air, every space. People began to report a feeling of suffocation, as if the simple act of breathing were a struggle against a force they couldn't see but felt with terrifying intensity. It was as if the city, in its grandeur, was being swallowed by something no one could control. What had once been a place of life, of constant movement, now seemed to be under the sway of an invisible and terrifying force. Fear began to spread among the inhabitants. Reports began to emerge of horrific visions, of recurring nightmares that invaded people's sleep, leaving them restless. But most disturbing of all was the feeling of being watched, as if something or someone was watching each of them, waiting for the right moment to act. It wasn't a normal feeling of paranoia. It was something deeper, more primal, as if the presence of this evil force were omnipresent, as if it were everywhere, following every step, every movement. And, strangest of all, no one knew exactly where it came from, but everyone sensed it wasn't human. The streets began to grow emptier at night, the lights dimmer, as if the city itself were yielding to the pressure of this force. But what was truly terrifying was the people's behavior. Some began to show clear signs of possession, as if their minds were being invaded by an invisible force. Some people's eyes began to glow with a strange light, as if they were being controlled, forced to do things they didn't understand, as if in a trance. Some people's voices changed, becoming deeper, more menacing, as if they were speaking from within another entity. It was as if the evil within the statue, this imprisoned being, had spread, taking possession of the minds and bodies of those around it. The city was being dominated by an ancient power, and no one seemed prepared to deal with it. It was as if every street, every building, every corner was being swallowed by this presence. The impact of the evil entity's release was immediate, and what had previously seemed like a tragic event, a simple restoration of a symbol of freedom, was now a battle against something much deeper, more ancient. New York City, famous for its vibrant energy and diversity, was being overtaken by a force no one could comprehend. It was no longer a matter of repairing a statue. It was a fight for survival, a struggle against something far more powerful than anyone could imagine. As the possessions spread, people wondered what else could be done. How could they fight a force that seemed beyond human comprehension? How could they stop something that was no longer a simple supernatural manifestation, but a force of destruction that was infiltrating every corner of the city, dominating everything and everyone? The evil that had been unleashed by the opening of the secret chamber did not seem to be something that could be controlled or contained. It was taking shape, spreading, and with each passing moment, it became more difficult to ignore. Fear and hopelessness were growing by the second, and the city was being swallowed by the darkness emanating from this unleashed entity. What really is this unleashed evil force? How does it connect to New York's history, and what lies behind this ancient curse? How did a simple monument restoration turn into a war against the supernatural? Let's continue exploring this story and understand the depths of this mystery that threatens to destroy everything we know. Comment below. That makes sense to me. The city was in complete chaos. It was no longer a simple urban landscape where life went on in its frenetic routine. The aura of New York, with its vibrant lights and characteristic sounds, had been taken over by an invisible yet palpable force. The evil unleashed by the restoration of the Statue of Liberty's torch could no longer be contained. The fire that at first seemed to merely illuminate the city now seemed to spread through it like a disease, poisoning the earth beneath its feet. Possessions, which had previously been only rumors or discreet signs, were spreading with frightening speed. The tormented souls of the statue's former guardians, those same souls that had been imprisoned for so long, were now free. They walked the streets of New York, their presence invisible yet so tangible that no one felt safe anymore. People who had once walked with confidence were now hiding, locked in their apartments, afraid to look outside at the distorted world that was forming. The question everyone was asking, but no one knew the answer to, was how to stop this evil, how to fight something unseen, something not physical, but whose consequences are devastating. The only chance to stop the chaos was to extinguish the torch's flame, but that seemed impossible. The flame wasn't just illuminating the torch, it was being fueled by something much older and more powerful, something no one knew exactly what it was, but which now manifested itself with irresistible force, enveloping the entire city. What had once seemed like a simple restoration task had become a fight for survival. It was no longer about repairing the monument. Now it was about saving New York. It was about preventing evil, an entity that had been imprisoned for centuries, from spreading beyond the statue's boundaries and swallowing everything within its reach. The confrontation was about to begin, and it wasn't just a matter of courage or intelligence. It was a battle against the unknown, against a force that seemed endless. No one was prepared for what was to come. No manual, no instruction book for dealing with what the torch had unleashed. The Statue of Liberty, long seen as a symbol of freedom, hope, and unity, now became the epicenter of a growing terror. The statue, once thought to be the key to prosperity and peace, had become a portal to a world of darkness and suffering. No longer a symbol of light, but of an evil that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right opportunity to reveal itself. And now, with the torch rekindled, the world was about to be dragged into this darkness. No longer a simple restoration of a monument, but a desperate race to stop what was being unleashed, a fight against something that could not be contained. Fear gripped everyone's hearts. It wasn't just the fear of being possessed or seeing others around them transform. It was the fear that the entire city, with its vibrant energy, would be swallowed by this ancient force. Time was running out. Shadows stretched across New York, invading everything that once seemed safe. The streets, the buildings, even the air we breathed seemed to be dominated by the presence spreading from within the statue. What was really trapped inside the Statue of Liberty? Who were these ancient guardians, and why was the statue built to keep them there? What does the flame truly represent? What else have you been waiting to be released? The battle is far from over, and New York City is about to be swept away by an event that will change everything. If you've made it this far, it's because you know that mystery and horror stories have something unique, something that captivates us and makes us want to know more. And if this content touched you, be sure to leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story and what intrigued you most. Oh, and if this video made you reflect on what lies behind iconic symbols like the Statue of Liberty, don't forget to like it. This helps us continue to bring you more content with this theme. If you feel like this mystery still has a lot to reveal, stick with me for the next few videos. What's to come will surprise you even more. Don't miss it, and see you soon.